And call the meeting to order of the Houston Forensic Science Center Board of Directors. Welcome, everyone. All righty, Madam Secretary, would you mind calling the roll for us? And guys, don't forget to say something to make sure that we all, if your video is not up, that it will pop up. But right now I'm seeing everybody, so. Ms. Benton?
Sure. Chairwoman Mitchell.
Here.
Vice Chair Linsky.
Here.
Director Vasquez.
Here.
Director Hilder.
Present.
Director Medina.
Here.
Director Blansett.
Here.
Director Cohen. Director Moore. Director Huff.
Here.
Okay, we thank you, and we do have a quorum. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, we have a quorum.
Lois Moore.
I'm here as well. Jordan
Is now joining.
Okay,
Ms. Calabrese.
great. Yes.
I apologize.
Yes. Okay, alrighty. The HFSC board meeting today is being conducted by video conference. This meeting is being held in compliance with Governor Abbott's suspension of certain provisions of the Texas Open Meetings Act in response to the COVID-19 public health emergency. The board is mindful of the health and safety of its members, staff presenters, and the public. HFSC, like many local government entities in the state, is utilizing video conferencing today to limit face-to-face interactions of large groups in an effort to slow the spread of COVID-19. All right. We're going to move down our agenda. Next agenda item is our executive session. So the time is now 8:02. The board will now go into executive session in accordance with sections 551.071 1A of the Texas Government Code, which is consultation with attorney regarding pending or contemplated litigation, and 551.074 personnel matters to deliberate the President and CEO's annual performance evaluation. At this time, I ask all members of the board to remain on this call. In addition to HFSC's President and CEO, Dr. Stout, HFSC's General Counsel, Ms. Akila Mance. Madam Secretary, please stop recording the meeting. Meeting of the Houston Forensic Science Center. For those of you who just joined us, we convened this board meeting at 8 a.m. in open session. We had a quorum at that time, and we proceeded with agenda item number 3, which is our executive session, also known as a closed session, at 8:02 a.m. For the record, we do have a quorum, and we still have a quorum, and I'd like to just recognize that now Director Cohen has joined us for the meeting. All right, let's see. Just a few reminders with this board meeting. We are recording. There may be a delay in the audio, so after asking questions or making comments, please allow several seconds for people to speak up, and don't forget to unmute when you talk. Let's see, after each presentation, the speakers will give us a chance to ask questions. There's also, if you have it on your toolbar, the little raise your hand icon too, so that way we can keep a monitor and keep a watch to see who has questions. And that way we can try and direct as to, okay, this person, now it's your turn, so that everybody's not talking over each other, because that kind of happens in some of these video conferences.
Is now joining.
Let's see, I think that is it. So I am going to move down. Let's see, continue down on my paper here, what I need to say. Okay, do we have any motions on the floor as a result of our executive session?
We do. This pertains to Peter Stout. I would like to just thank him for his experience and leadership. I think we're all very appreciative of him, and because of that, I'd like to make a motion, and in that motion, I'd like to move that Mr. Stout be given a merit increase of 3% at this time.
Right, that was Mr. Hilder who made the motion for Dr. Stout for 3% merit increase. Do we have a second?
I would like to second that motion.
Okay, Ms. Blanchett, Director Blanchett has seconded the motion. Do we have any discussion? I think the biggest thing is to say, Dr. Stout, thank you so much for your leadership to HFSC. Especially during this time of COVID-19 and being proactive. And we appreciate everything that you have done in your leadership. And is there any other discussion from anyone? Okay, we need to proceed with this. This will be a roll call vote. And so our Madam Secretary will call the roll, and we will each need to say yes or aye or agree or not. And so make sure you do talk for a moment so that we can all see, because we have to be visible on the screen. So Madam Secretary, would you please do the roll call vote for us in
Yes.
relation to this?
Chairwoman Mitchell,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lunchke,
Yes.
Director Vasquez,
Yes.
Director Hilder,
Yes.
Director Medina,
Yes.
Director Blanchett,
Yes.
Director Cohen,
Yes.
Director Moore, Director Moore,
I think she's having technical difficulties.
Director Moore, can you hear us on your phone? Director
I
Huff,
don't know.
If that was that for me, yes, I approve.
Okay. Did we hear from Director Moore? Did she ever get on? Because I would like to record her vote also.
She's muted right now, so there we go.
Director Moore's computer audio is not working. That's why she's on the phone.
Okay.
It looks like she's receiving assistance from her granddaughter right now.
Okay. I'll give it another minute because I do want to make sure that we record her vote.
And Jordan, I apologize for the delay, but I'm on now.
Thank you, Tracy. I have you recorded as joining at 9:02 a.m.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Can she put a vote in the chat or not? I don't know the rules on that.
Lois Moore
Oh,
is
there's-
now exiting.
Okay, they're still going. Ms. Mance, what's the rules on that? What do you? I don't want to spend too much time and delay too much time, but I also want to make sure that we have the opportunity for her to vote.
Yes, Director Moore, can you hear us?
I think she's calling back in.
Can't hear us at all. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, I think right now the problem is she can't hear us one way or the other. So either way, once she can finally actually hear us, then we can, she could do it visually if Jordan asked the question. I just think right now she can't hear us or.
I think that's her calling back
Is
in.
that her calling in?
Yeah.
Hello,
Here she is.
Moore
can you hear me?
is
Lois
now
Moore?
joining.
Yes, we can hear you. Ms. Benton, would you record her vote, Ms. Moore, Director Moore's vote?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Director Moore, do you vote in favor?
yes,
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
I'm
great.
sorry.
Thank you. All right. That is passed unanimously. So congratulations, Dr. Stout, and thank you again for your service.
Thanks, y'all.
Okay. All righty. Agenda item number 4A is going to consider extending the July 2020 deadline for submission of Dr. Stout's proposal list of annual priorities and performance objectives to September 2020 and possible relay action. Dr. Stout, let's see. All right, guys, if you recall, if the board will recall, the second part of Dr. Stout's annual evaluation in his presentation to the board regarding his proposed annual priorities for the new fiscal year and his performance objectives. Last year during this meeting, the board voted unanimously to have Dr. Stout present that information to us for approval each July. However, with COVID-19 impacting so much of our operations, Dr. Stout has requested that we move his annual presentation to August of 2020 to that board meeting. Is that correct, Dr. Stout?
I think we had September 2020.
Did we have September? Okay. Sorry, I had August.
But yes, for September, that'd be correct.
Script here. I'm just trying to make sure I had everything appropriately. So here we go, and I messed that up. So, all right, for September 2020. All righty, yes, and we discussed that. Let's see. I need to have a motion so that we can move this presentation from July to September.
So move.
Okay, that was Director Moore that made that motion. Do we have a second?
I second it.
Oh, Director Huff, thank you so much. Okay, for the record, we will have to do another roll call vote at this time. Madam Secretary, would you please call the vote, the roll?
Chairwoman Mitchell,
Yes, I approve.
Vice Chair Lenschke,
Approve.
Director Vasquez,
I approve.
Director Hilder,
Approve.
Director Medina,
Approve.
Director Blanchett,
Approve.
Director Cohen,
Approve.
Director Moore,
Approved.
Director Huff.
Approve.
All right, excellent. The motion carries unanimously. And so, Dr. Stout, we look forward to that presentation in September. Okay, agenda item 5 is public comment. Let's see, we are providing 2 ways for the public to comment during this meeting in accordance with the governor's directive. First, the board meeting notice provided an email address for members of the public to send requests to speak during the public comment period. Those requests were required to be sent to us by Thursday, July the 9th at 8 a.m. Madam Secretary, did we receive any requests by email?
No, Madam Chair, we did not receive any requests from the general public via email to speak during this public comment portion.
Okay, great. To make sure that we're giving the public every opportunity to participate in this meeting, I will also open up the floor now to provide time for anyone on this video conference from the public who would like to speak. Is there anyone who would like to speak during this time? If so, please unmute yourself and state your name. Each member of the public will have 3 minutes to speak. Do we have anyone who is on the call who would like to speak? Okay, hearing no one, then I'm going to go ahead and close the public comment period, and we will continue with our agenda. Alrighty, agenda item 6 is going to be the approval of the minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from the last meeting? Alrighty, we're going to do a voice vote for this one. We do not need to do a roll call vote. We are able to do a voice vote. So I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the last board meeting.
I move to approve the minutes from the last board meeting.
Okay, I heard Director Blanchett make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the last board meeting. All right, do I have a second?
And I'll second. This is
Okay,
Mary.
Vice Chair Lenschke is seconding. Are there any discussion or comments or any corrections that need to be made to the meeting minutes? Okay, all in favor of approving the meeting minutes from the last board meeting?
Aye.
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 Okay, anyone oppose? Are there any abstentions?
I abstain. I was not at the meeting last time.
Okay, that was Director Huff who was abstaining. Thank you. All right. Yes,
This
ma'am.
is, this is Ellen Cohn. I have to abstain as well because I wasn't on the board at the time.
All right, thank you. All right, we have 2 abstentions. I did not hear any nays or anyone in opposition, so the motion carries. Thank you. The meeting minutes are approved. Okay, next item is my chair's report. Let's see. Well, I don't have a whole lot other than please help me welcome Ellen Cohen to the board. She is our newest board member. She was just approved on July the 1st. Thank you so much for being willing to help continue moving HFSC forward. Director Cohen has had such an amazing career with representing us, Houston, as state representative, as president and CEO of the Houston Area Women's Center, on city council as mayor pro tem. I mean, it's just been amazing, and we are so honored to have you join us and to help us as we continue moving HFSC forward in its mission. So please welcome, and we're just, again, so happy that you're here.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the support given to me, and I particularly appreciate the mayor's nominating me and my former colleagues on council approving it, and I look forward to providing whatever assistance I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and welcome. Okay, just as a note today for our presentations, as our corporate officers and staff members present today, you'll see many of them sharing their screens with you. When that happens, our videos will go to the bottom of the screen if you're on a computer. Hopefully, all you should be able to do is just raise your hand virtually, excuse me, with this new feature on our video conferencing. But our presenters will be stopping frequently to see if anyone has any questions. Please hold your questions until those designated times. There may be some delay in the audio, so we'll give a little bit of a pause. And then hopefully we can make sure everyone's questions are answered. Okay, we are going to move on to agenda item number 8. This is the report from Dr. Stout, our president and CEO, who will include technical updates, outreach efforts, staffing changes, and other corporate business items, including steps taken to operate safely and effectively during the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Stout, the floor is yours.
All righty. I'm back. Thank you all. I appreciate the support as always. This has been one of the most gratifying challenges I think I've taken on in my life. So thank you for your continued support. Alrighty, President's report in our crazy COVID world here. Typical first slide that I run is, oops, make sure I'm clicking the right buttons here. There we go. Y'all see my screen all right? Seeing the slides? Good. Like we've talked many times before, as we are able to hit some of the backlogs, the turnaround time goes up because we have classically calculated turnaround time from the point of request to the point the report is issued. So if it's an old case, the point it's issued, it's an old case. And I'll talk a little bit about goals here and what we're thinking of how to deal with goals versus turnaround versus backlog, because the two kind of oppose each other. But that increased turnaround time there is reflective that Latent Prints is making some progress against their backlog, as is biology and toxicology. Toxicology continues to just knock it out of the park. I mean, they have, even in the circumstances of reduced staff on site, the number of cases that they have been cranking out in the last few months has been truly impressive. Staffing. Actually, staffing's been kind of a good news point. We have continued with recruiting and actually have been fairly successful in hiring in the last month. So right now we're sitting at 197 staff. We still have 7 City of Houston civilian employees that are within the management of HFSC. That's been pretty stable now for quite a while. All the rest are at-will corporate employees of the corporation. We have 13 open positions at the moment, and we've got 6 offers that have been accepted. Easy for me to say. Experienced crime scene investigator, forensic biology analyst, R&D specialist, so into the R&D section, and 3 toxicology analysts have all accepted positions here recently. We have 7 active vacancies. Experienced crime scene investigator that we're recruiting for, another DNA analyst. We have the DNA technical lead position that's been open as Robin Guidry has transitioned out, gone back to school. We have a DNA tech lead in training, and Courtney is doing the acting until we can get the 1 academic requirement for the in training person finished, and then that'll transition, but that's still active. We expect that to be open for a while in this transition. We have 3 toxicology analysts that we're still recruiting for, and a multimedia analyst. So then, and the 1 seized drug analyst we're still holding on because we're doing okay keeping up with casework and not entirely sure what we want that position to look like. So that's kind of where we're at staffing wise. I know we've got some new people. Any questions I can answer about staffing, where we're at? HR has done a marvelous job continuing to recruit. The staff have done a marvelous job being able to do interviews and be creative about how we've gone about hiring. All right, I'll keep going here. You'll remember at the start of the pandemic, we basically canceled all the outreach stuff. So we have continued to not do any physical outreach stuff. It is all virtual. I did with Nick Hughes, who's a lawyer with Public Defender's Office here. Did a presentation at the annual Rusty Duncan Conference, which is the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyer Association annual conference. Did a presentation yesterday for the Jewish Federation's Women's Professional Group. And yesterday we had a first tour we've had in a while, small group tours for new freshman council member Tiffany Thomas was through. So we still keep finding opportunities where we can continue to do outreach, but it's all virtual. It's a little different. So big chunk of my update is about where we're at with COVID. This I've updated a little bit from the materials that were in the board packet because this changes on a daily basis. I know it's a little different. I'm sure that will make Akila's head blow up there, but I figured y'all want to know where we're at right now. So we have had 10 staff members in total so far that have tested positive. As of yesterday, we've had 5 of them be able to return to work. So they have recovered, they've had negative tests, they're symptom-free, and are back to work. We still have 5 of them that are self-quarantined. 4 of those are able to work from home. They've got mild or no symptoms. One of them, it's not an issue of symptoms, it's an issue of just there's no constructive way to be able to work from home. There was about a 2-week stretch in there that we could not respond to retrieve multimedia evidence from scenes because that entire unit was either positive or quarantined from exposures. We now, as of yesterday, have at least a couple of people that can make scenes because they've been able to return to work. To date, we have had an additional, outside of those 10 positives, we've had an additional 16 people that have had to quarantine due either to symptoms or to known exposures. Of those, 15 have been negative, and 1 we're still awaiting results. So really, last few days have been much better news than the last couple of weeks. Last couple of weeks were getting pretty grim just with the number of positives we kept getting. Maybe it's a little bit of a breather. With the acceleration in infection rates, particularly here in Houston, I still expect we are going to have issues. CSU in particular is where we worry the most because we only have 27 crime scene investigators on a good day. We get 1 or 2 of them out, and trying to maintain 24/7 operations gets really strained really quickly. So we have implemented some on-call scheduling for them. but we are constantly evaluating for when we've got to step to a more emergency scheduling type circumstance, which I really hope not to do because it's tough on them. It's tough on them anyways, with all of the increases in scenes that they're seeing, and then this on top of it is an issue. We had seized drugs and client services. As things were opening up, they had come back entirely on site. We have had them go back to alternating shifts on site and off site, partly on site, partly off site. That they went back to that as of July 6th. So we'd seen controlled substances cases go down a little bit, making it a little bit easier to reduce the staffing that's there, but it still has other implications for continuing the work. It's just trying to reduce the number of people that are on site and the potential risks there. I did want to point out in this is creating issues up and down the justice system. I'm sure you've seen some of the news articles about the positives at HPD. You know, this is, I'm sure, creating all kinds of challenges for them. Ours are significant. I can only imagine what they're dealing with. But there was an article that Harris County Courts has about 80,000 criminal cases backlogged currently. We are going to be seeing implications of this for years, trying to untangle what this is creating for the justice agency. So part of our goal, part of my goal, is trying to maintain our productivity as best we can so that when the courts get back operational, that is going to be a tsunami of requests as the courts attempt to address their enormous, I mean, it's a mind-boggling backlog that they have. I also get that is going to put an additional pressure on the quality of the physical evidence because the courts are going to be even more dependent on that physical evidence as they try to dig out from their backlog. Any questions so far of just who we've had positive, negative, that kind of thing?
Yes, Dr. Stout. I just wanted to say that I'm glad that the positives we've had, those who have been symptomatic, it has been mild, which is a blessing. It's not, I don't want to say unexpected, you know, just with the rising rates here throughout Texas and the whole Southwest, it's not, you know, it's not unexpected, I guess. But I do want to just make sure, you know, we're following CDC guidelines. We're actually combining and looking at first responders, the guidelines for them, along with healthcare providers, because those are really strict with what's going on in terms of protection and all. And so I think HFSC is taking very aggressive steps in protecting our staff and particularly CSU when they're out on scenes, because we don't know, we're still learning so much about COVID-19 and you know, how it's transmitted and all. And so I think that, you know, we're really doing a tremendous amount of great work on that. And we're okay on PPE, right, Dr. Stout?
Yes, that we have gotten the PPE circumstance pretty well straightened out. We basically have what we model out to be a 12-month supply right now.
Okay, great. Director Blanchett has a question for you.
Yes, ma'am. You're muted at the moment.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
One of the things that's come up in the news as a result of all the COVID-19 testing that's done is a lack of reagents. And my understanding from some previous discussions that we do share similar types of reagents. How are we doing in that area? Do we have enough of them?
Yes, so far we have not seen any pinches on the reagents that we use. You're correct. There are some similarities between the reverse transcriptase polymerase chain reaction, the RT-PCR type testing that is done for COVID testing, and what we do in DNA. But so far we've not seen any impacts to reagents that we need for case processing.
Okay.
Something we keep an eye on, but yeah, it's a good question. Any other questions on that part? So just to walk you through a little bit of things that we have done. Basically, we have taken a position in this that there's kind of the clinical evaluation of symptoms and a testing evaluation. We've taken the clinical steps and added some testing on top of that from the CDC guidelines. And we have taken the CDC guidelines that are targeted towards first responders, and that's what we've been trying to apply, because particularly for CSU, basically they're a first responder type position. So CSU at scenes, we started that a while back. They went from surgical masks to N95s on scenes plus eye protection. They double glove. It seems to have worked pretty well. So far, all of the positives that we have had are attributable to either household member exposure or some other social exposure outside of work. There is nothing so far that we can attribute to an exposure at work or at a scene. Hopefully that stays the case, and that's what we're after, but that's what, of all of those 10 that we've had so far. So we have severely limited visitors into the facility. Any visitor that comes to the facility is required to wear a mask, required to do a temperature check. We have staff. We've stayed at strongly encouraged with staff. I will say the staff have been very compliant wearing masks and very compliant doing temperature checks, and also very compliant keeping their distance from each other. Staff have done a marvelous job of devising how to function in the facility. Now all of the cubicles that we have, and I think all of you are familiar, the cubicles that we have are about a 4.5 foot, 5 foot high cubicle. So they've added curtains on the openings of all of those. So basically now they've got a almost enclosed space for when they're working at their workspace. We've basically closed down all of the conference spaces and the break room spaces, taking chairs out of those to discourage any groups congregating in those. We have cycling posters to try and keep messages fresh about things that people should be doing. The staff we're estimating something north of 600 masks for everybody. So we've been able to provide all staff members at least 2 masks, and basically any staff member that wanted masks for family members, we've been able to provide that for anybody that wants for family members as well. That was all a organic, self-actualized effort, and they're still doing that. So that, I think, has helped both staff as well as their families. And then the last one that we've started doing is we contracted with Bodhi Technology, which is the same Bodhi that we've used for DNA outsourcing. They had stood up RT-PCR testing for their staff, and now they've started offering that as a service to some of their clients. So we took them up on that deal to try and implement monitoring testing, because some have currently with turnaround times what they are, it's unmanageable for people that go. If you can take 2 to 3 days to find an appointment to get tested, and then we've had results that have taken upwards of 2 weeks to get results back, which means we've got people in limbo for weeks. We can't get people back to work. It takes that much additional time to get people out that may be positive and reduce the risk at the workspace. So Bodhi has been promising 48 to 72 hour turnaround time from the point of collection, which is something that you can actually work with. So we implemented this. We did the first collection on the 6th, Monday this week. We did get results sort of back on Wednesday. It has been an adventure, because for all of the information you hear about the need to do this kind of regular monitoring, test everybody once a week, it is difficult to set up. There's all kinds of barriers to this. So basically what we found, we collected 97, actually we collected 97 people on Monday. We had 10 of those leak in shipments. So those samples were compromised. We had 87 that were tested. Mercifully, all 87 were negative. But what we encountered was Bodhi and their legal counsel had understood Texas to be what's called a direct-to-consumer state, where an individual consumer can request a test like that. Unfortunately, what they also encountered was all of these COVID tests that are currently used in the country are authorized by the FDA under the emergency use authorization. The language within the emergency use authorization necessitates a physician order for that test. So basically, we collected things on Monday, assuming the direct-to-consumer laws in Texas, but the clinical lab director for Bodie interpreted that to mean that there needed to be a physician order in order for Bodie to release those results back to the individual, and that Bodie risked their CLIA certification, basically their accreditation, if they release those results. So basically what that means is we've got to find a physician to do the order. I think we have about figured that out. We won't do this collection on the 13th. The next collection we'll do is the 20th, so that we've got time to work out how to do this order so that results can get released back to the employee correctly. But it's things like that. The landscape around the regulation of the tests is constantly shifting. It is very difficult for laboratories to figure out how to do this. But Bodie did get the results back. So we collected Monday, shipped Monday evening. They received the samples Tuesday and had results back to us on Wednesday. So, from that standpoint, stuff worked. So we got a little bit more to work on with that. But that, now, if we have that in place, and third party doesn't pay for monitoring. So this is something that we are piloting out of our budget. We'll do it for as long as we can afford, because it also costs us dearly to not be able to get somebody back into production. And it costs us dearly if we've got a positive that's around the laboratory, potentially infectious for longer than we can do otherwise. So hopefully that explains some of that. Janet, looks like you got a question there.
Oh, I'll defer to Janet right now. I have a question as well.
Okay.
Yeah, the question I have is that for people who have come down with COVID and they're now quarantined at home, are we asking them to come into the office to get
No.
give a sample, or are they doing it from their house, or how's
So
that being handled?
So what we have come down to is if we have someone who is exposed and asymptomatic, we schedule them at the end of the day and they come in and can get swabbed when they come in. So what we're looking for is anybody who comes to the laboratory once a week or more, that we try and get them tested weekly. But if we've got an exposed individual that's asymptomatic, we'll do that. If we have a recovered individual who was positive but meets the clinical guidelines for asymptomatic, so no fever for 3 days without any fever reducer, no respiratory symptoms, it's been at least 10 days since the onset of symptoms. Again, we schedule them at the end of the day. They're required to come in with a mask, do it all at the end. They're in and out to mitigate the risk. But somebody who's symptomatic, no, you go deal with your doctor. That person's too risky to bring on site. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, Peter, hi, it's Philip. The question I have, though, is who actually does the swabbing? I mean, is it one of the staff members?
So
And,
what we have,
yeah.
what we've arranged with Bodie is they actually do the medical oversight and the collection. So they subcontract licensed phlebotomists here in Houston, and those are the people that come on site and do the collection. They package up the samples and ship them to Bodie. So it's basically a turnkey solution for us.
And where are they located?
Bodie is in Virginia.
Okay. And so they're not open to the public, or are they open to the public?
I mean, they're a commercial laboratory. They've got about 1,000 sample a day capacity is what they estimate. Where they necessarily will offer that capacity in total, I don't know. But they started with this for basically critical clients that they have to try and help protect personnel. And I know they test their personnel weekly. Their policy is it's mandatory for their personnel. We've made this policy voluntary, strongly encouraged, but voluntary. Stacy?
Okay.
Does this, I know Bodie also does FBio testing.
Yeah.
How is this impacting their ability, or is it at all impacting their ability to work kits and contracts and that kind of
What
thing?
I understand is this is completely separate from the forensic testing, so it shouldn't have any impact. I mean, this is some of why we've committed with the staff that we'll do this through July. Okay, maybe the first week into June, since this first, there were some hiccups with this first collection. They're not going to charge us for this first collection, so we may go a little bit longer than just July. But part of what we need to see is if they are actually able to maintain this turnaround time, if we're getting useful information that we can actually act on, and that there aren't any other implications of this that we need to watch out for. Jenny, you had another question there?
Yes, this is regards to how we're paying for this. I understand it's coming out of our budget to do this,
Yep.
and we'll continue as long as we can. Is there any way we can get any kind of state, local, or federal help as far as paying for the testing, considering these are first responders?
Yeah.
And they're essential personnel.
That's a firm maybe. I keep looking. We have tried any and all ways we can think. Everybody is struggling trying to figure out how to pay for any of this testing. The CARES Act money that was allocated to the city, I know they're struggling trying to figure out how to pay for stuff. It is a real question. We can tolerate this for a little bit. After about 4 collections, we're going to have to seriously think, is it, because we will have to forestall something else. It would mean not buying vehicles. It would mean doing something, taking it from someplace else to continue beyond that. And we will have to really stop and think, is that worth it?
Okay. One of the things I've been hearing about is some groups who have a population that they're doing the testing from, they believe the population has relatively low positives. So what they do is they bundle up some of their tests.
Oh, pooled testing.
Yeah, pool testing. Is that a consideration, Chair?
So pooled testing kind of makes me twitch a little bit, particularly in a circumstance where, yes, you have a lot of negatives, but you also have a pretty high false negative rate already in all of the testing. So basically what you're doing in pooling the testing is you are making yourself even more dependent on that limited detection. Bodie's limited detection that they've reported to me is 23 viral genomic equivalents per microliter of universal transport medium, which is pretty low threshold already. But so in part what that does is that we're doing an anterior nares collection, not the stick that goes to the back of your head. And part of the reason they can do that is they've got a relatively low detection limited as it is. I would be really concerned about too much pooling, is you're just going to drive that false negative rate up. Pooling used to be a common thing in workplace drug testing, and workplace drug testing had to abandon it because of sample identification issues. The management of pooled testing is much more complex, and you open yourself up to a lot more sample handling issues.
Okay, thank you.
Stacy?
I know we've only had 1 collection day, but have you had any feedback from staff about this? Are they supportive? Do they want this? Do they feel like, it's a good option for them? I mean, what are some of the folks' thoughts about this?
The feedback that I have had has been overwhelmingly positive about it from the staff. I've had a number of people email me, message me that they very much appreciate HFSC providing this. So they've been very supportive of it, even with the hiccups that we had Monday. I mean, it's really, there were no complaints with it. The staff have been very supportive of it. I mean, I think, and this is part of the value of it. It helps manage anxieties. Anxious people make errors. So if we can help reduce anxieties, that's worth something right there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions on this? I spent a fair bit of time on it, but I wanted you all to understand where we're sitting. I mean, last couple of days has at least been better. We're all figuring this is going to be a long, hard road with this, so trying to have as many tools in place as we can. All right, so the other part I had was some about our company goals that we talk about at this time of the year. So we'll go over where we're at for 2020. Basically, this is rolling into the staff's mid-year cycle, and I appreciate you moving, talking about next year's goals to September. COVID has definitely disrupted trying to figure out what reasonable goals to set are, but also I think, as Amy will talk some about with the FBio update that she has, implementation of STR-Mix, the probabilistic genotyping software, we have very little data yet to understand what our actual capacity in biology is with the implementation of that. It dramatically changes our ability to process samples. And so if we push this out to September, it gives us a little bit longer to figure out just what it's going to really mean. Most labs that have already implemented, I think we're the 25th lab in the country to implement STR-Mix. Other laboratories that have implemented earlier say basically their productivity is cut in half in that first year because it creates so much more and so much more complex data. It increases the review demand. And then you recover some of it, but how much you recover is still kind of an open question for a lot of labs. But of the goals that we set for this year, the biggest one was the lab move, which thanks to Charles and everybody's hard work, we accomplished that one on time, under budget. I am so glad we did. I am so glad we got into the new facility when we did, because were we still in the old facility, I would hate to think where we'd be at right now. We did a lot of workshopping with the entire company when we set these goals and set up basically a 3-year cycle on these goals. So this is the first time we'd really put together goals like this for the organization. One of the things that we were looking to do was drive improvement of how staff are engaged and the efficacy of the management of staff. So we set goals around driving one-on-one interactions between supervisors and their staff. So we had 80% completion of monthly one-on-ones, as well as a 90% completion of semi-annual reviews. We are well ahead of both of those targets, so we're making that goal. One of the things that we were looking as an indicator of staff satisfaction is the turnover rate. So we had estimated based on prior data. Typically what you see in this sector is between 15 and 20% turnover rates. Ours had been about 12% historically. This year we've seen 7%. So we get staff in, staff stay pretty well. And then we've got a combination between the Texas Forensic Science Commission requirements for continuing education for licensed analysts. And then you'll remember we also adopted the OSAC standards, and the OSAC standard is 16 hours of continuing education. So we put those together and have made a requirement of, or a goal of 16 hours of continuing ed for all staff, and we are also making that goal. So the one we've not been making, and that we have made the decision to stay with, is what we had set out for the production goal. So in this, there's a few things in this. We looked at it, obviously COVID, nobody could have seen that coming. So we had a lot of discussions about, do we revise this goal given COVID? And what we determined was, yeah, COVID hadn't helped anything. It certainly made stuff harder, but COVID wasn't really the reason that we weren't achieving this goal. So, we don't want to just simply move the goalpost just because we could with COVID. It's important that we hold ourselves accountable to these things, but there's more in this than just simply that. If you think about the turnaround times, how we measure turnaround time, basically we put too much in this goal. So when we wrote this, we wrote the goal poorly, and we need to learn from that. As turnaround time, as we look to reduce backlog, that's going to drive turnaround time up. So to have both backlog goal in there and a turnaround time goal in there basically go exactly opposite each other and create an incentive, particularly at the individual level, to work older cases. Well, that's not the incentive that we want to set up with a goal. So we need to revise and think about how we do that differently. The latent print and toxicology backlogs are so big that they drive all of basically everything around that backlog, and they create some kind of perverse, non-intuitive ways the averages move. So toxicology has been a large backlog that's been about a 90-day average, 90 to about 120-day average, versus latent prints is about a 400-day average. So as we got rid of toxicology, instead of the backlog turnaround time going down, it actually went up because it then becomes driven by latent prints. Well, when you're talking about a goal, that does also drives the wrong behavior of what we're after. So the thing of it is the toxicology challenges, the challenges in biology. I mean, those are things that we have learned some lessons after. We made some incorrect assumptions about what we were going to be able to do training wise. That's not COVID. Those are things that we've missed this goal on. So the biggest impact of this, though, is on how we've set this up. The corporate level goals fall mostly to have an impact on myself and Amy, which we're the ones that are responsible for the corporation. So that's where that responsibility should fall. The percentage that this affects staff is really quite small. It's the fact that we've missed this one part of the goal probably, well, for our very obsessive, very competitive staff, they're not going to like missing a goal. I can guarantee you that. But in terms of the actual impact on their evaluation at the end of the year, it will be small. And probably for most staff, it won't mean the difference of whether they get a raise or not. So I think it's reasonable to keep this. The impact of it is a reasonable impact, and it's important to keep us hold us accountable. Any questions on that part? So for September, what we'll look to bring is a revision of how we're going to lay out these goals. And basically, I think the framework of it is we will split the turnaround time part away from the backlog goals so that they can both move the appropriate direction and not conflict with each other. We'll pull the support staff goals out separately so that there are fewer things that are lumped into one goal and fewer things that will conflict with each other so that you basically make an impossible to achieve goal. I think we will look to frame the goal around a throughput goal that is more controllable and that staff can see where their individual contribution makes a difference in that. And then we'll also have components, because it's still important to reflect the fact that we may think we're doing great, but if the outside stakeholder still sees, I turned in that sample 2 years ago and I still don't have a result, that's a problem. So we'll still have components in there to help drive towards the fact that what the stakeholder sees from the point they turn that in to the point they get the result back is what they need. Anything I can answer, because that's end of what I've got. Any other questions that you got for me? All righty. Well,
All
I
right.
appreciate the support. And Amy, I guess you're up next.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Stout. Yes, agenda item 10 is our presentation by Dr. Castillo regarding the outsourcing of the forensic biology and DNA services to help eliminate the sexual assault kit backlog. It's going to be funded through an FY 2019 BJA DNA capacity enhancement and backlog reduction grant. Dr. Castillo, and then you also have the operations report. So is there anything that you need to say about the two contracts?
Yes, there is. It's actually at the end of the operations report.
Okay.
Is it
Well,
okay if I go in that order?
Yes, I think that's fine. Is everybody okay on the board with us doing the operations and then doing the contracts? Okay.
Yes.
All right, perfect. Okay, Dr. Castillo, we'll do your operations report and then we will consider approval for the 2 contracts.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, Dr. Amy Castillo, Chief Operations Officer. Good morning, everybody. So on the operations report, sorry, I'm trying to see where all my screens are and where to click to make things move. Hold on 1 second. Okay, can y'all see the data slide now?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. So it's just some overall updates before we dive into biology again. As the company as a whole, as Peter mentioned, our turnaround time is up this month. It's up because toxicology is working a lot of cases right now. Their turnaround time averages 90 to 120 days. But when you look at that, they completed close to 700 of those in a month, it definitely shifts our turnaround time up. However, it's a really good thing that they're working that many of those older cases and getting them through the door. The other piece is Leighton Prince is working the older cases in their backlog as well as the new rush cases. And so their turnaround time continues to generally average between 400 to 500 days because they're closing those older cases, which again is a good thing that they're doing it. But it does reflect in our turnaround time. The other piece I wanted to talk about is, as Peter mentioned, with the COVID cases increasing in the city, as well as what we were dealing with internally, we did decide that CSCM, our Client Services and Case Management Group, as well as Seize Drugs, needed to go back onto team rotations. And so basically what that is we have 2 teams in those divisions. One team is working on site, the other team is working off-site. The goal of doing this with them again, and in all the sections that are currently doing it, is that we reduce the number of staff on site, but also that we try to isolate those teams from each other as much as possible, so that if one person gets sick, we don't take out the whole section. We may have to isolate a team, but then we have the other team that can keep the work going. With client services and case management, as this has progressed, we have actually gotten to where they can do some of their work from home, specifically they accession all of our blood alcohol kits and they write reports for that when they carry out that function, and they're able to do part of that report writing from home. So that has helped this time when we had to put them on that rotation. Seize Drugs is an area where we are not able to do that casework from home currently. We did see a decrease again last month in those cases. As we've watched this happen, it seems like when the cases go up, there's a lot of other things going on and the Seize Drugs requests go down. So thankfully with them on rotation, we're still able to keep up with that reduced request level, even though they can't do casework at home. That being said, we are working currently to figure out how maybe we can implement some more paperless process for them so that we can do casework from home. The concern being we can't guarantee that those requests are going to stay down. Some of those courts are still happening virtually. That is essential work that needs to be done. So if the cases go up and we can't have everybody on site in order to keep the operation running, putting something in place that they can actually do the work from home. So we've started that process. I don't think it's going to be a quick process, but we at least got the ball rolling on getting them to where they could do some more work from home. The other pieces on the blood alcohol backlog, we're really excited that we got the 5 new positions in our new budget. As Peter mentioned, we've actually already had offers accepted for 3 of those positions, and the section is actively reviewing more applications right now for the 2 other new positions, as well as 1 vacancy that they just had show up. So we're actively working on getting those people in so that we can get them trained, and then in the next review year, we're going to be able to make a lot of progress on getting back where we need to be on blood alcohols, even with the increased request load that we're seeing. And that request load went down at the beginning, kind of actually in the middle of the first shutdown we had for COVID. Currently, it is not down. It is back up to where we're getting about twice as much as we were a year ago. Do y'all have any questions on that? Sorry, I just realized my camera was off. I apologize. Okay, so then we're gonna dive back into the sexual assault kits this month and a biology update, as we are still struggling with getting through that. One thing I want to talk about on this slide is the number, the total. Last month when we presented this and the month before, we had this number broken down into two pieces. What we've realized is that can be confusing for stakeholders as well as staff because all three numbers are equally important. Last month, what we presented separately was what you see in the pie is in-house and outsourcing. We reported as one number, and then the outsource reviews we reported as a separate number. So we've decided to combine those. So right now, when you see that total of the 1,130, I don't want y'all to think it went from the about 600 we were talking about last month to that number. Both of combined, those were both there last month. But we did decide this is just a much clearer way to present this. I'll go through what the different pieces of the pie mean. So if you look at the blue piece, the in-house, what that means is those are kits we have not completed testing on, but that we have planned on testing at HFSC. The orange piece of the pie are the kits that we've been tagging for once we have outsourcing contracts in place to send to a vendor laboratory to work while we're working on the cases in-house. And the way that we actually go between those two categories quite a bit, because depending on the vendor laboratory's timeline, it may make more sense for us to work older kits in-house and send them newer kits. But in our LIMS system itself, we need to keep those tagged differently. So they're the same thing in the sense that they are kits that testing hasn't been completed. They just may be completed in different locations. The outsource reviews, what that is, just to remind everybody, when we do have a kit tested by a vendor laboratory, a report is issued to the investigator. However, it's not complete. Once that report is issued to the investigator and we have the data, we then have to review that data in order to put any profiles into CODIS. And especially on sexual assault kits, CODIS is a critical component of finishing that work because that is where you're going to get hits against potentially other kits or against convicted offenders, and that can really make a difference in what ends up happening, not only to that specific case, but to other cases as well. So again, that's why it's all on this slide right now too, is because when we have those outsource reviews separated out, it's too easy for those to get lost in the mix when they really are just as critical as getting the kit tested in the first place. So, and I do have good news on this slide right now. Since I grabbed this data at the end of the month, the section has been working a lot on outsource reviews, and we'll talk a little more about that later, but that number is now actually down to 426 as of this morning. So they've made quite a dent in the outsource review number. And I just, any questions so far?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Since we are going to be outsourcing some of the testing to Bodie and I believe another company, how are we incorporating their results into our LIMS system, if at all?
So their report gets uploaded into our LIMS system. We're actually the ones that, so let me back up. They send us the reports all electronically. We then take that report, we upload it into our LIMS system, and then we issue that report to the investigators. Along with that report, they send us all of the backup data to the report. That also gets uploaded into the case, and then that's what we use to do our technical review of the work and to do our CODIS upload. And all of that also gets documented in our LIMS system.
Okay, so whenever you do metric calculations based on the data in LIMS, it also includes all the outsourced information as well then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and what's happened and kind of why it gets separated out and pulled back together is there different request types in LIMS because each of our request types in LIMS has different report templates and those type of things that you need to use. And so that's why we realized this past month, we really just need to put all of this on one slide. Even though in LIMS, all the metrics are pulling, they just pull up under different request types.
Okay, thank you.
And just before I move on to the other slide, and I know we have our new board member, Director Cohen, I just want to review why we're here, because I don't want to be here with these numbers. I know the section doesn't want to be here with these numbers, and I know y'all don't, or the stakeholders don't want us to be here with these numbers. What has happened over the past year, right, is a lot of it's been the implementation of probabilistic genotyping. That training program was much more difficult than we anticipated, and certainly much more timely than we anticipated. And so as we were working on getting new analysts online, and when we had to put that on the end of it, it really shifted the timeline for when we were going to be completed with training. And that then became a struggle of how to balance what's coming in the door that needs to be worked with getting our analysts signed off to do the probabilistic genotyping. The other piece has been, is vendor capacity for outsourcing. When we shut down the lab to move, we had intended to ship 1 to 2 months of kits off-site to be worked because we knew we couldn't work them in-house. And once we got to that point, the vendor we were working with on its own did not have the capacity to work the kits at the time. We could have sent them the kits, but we felt like there wasn't any purpose in that if they were going to sit on a shelf. And so we made the decision to hold on to them until we could figure out the new contracts and their capacity. So that's also contributed to this backlog building. Of course, COVID hasn't helped anything, as we've mentioned, but I also don't want to overstate COVID, because while it hasn't helped anything and it's not helping us clear this, it's not why we're in this position currently. Okay, and so this graph is just showing you the work that we were able to complete on sexual assault kits this month. As you can see, the blue bar is sexual assault kits that we tested in-house, so reports that we issued. The orange bar is the outsourced reviews that we completed. So as you can see, in June, we completed just about the same number of sexual assault kits in-house as we did the month prior. We had hoped that that number would go up. It didn't, and I'll talk on the next slide about some of the stuff that we're seeing that's making that a little difficult in-house. And on the outsourced reviews, you see that number is much lower, but what was happening during the month is a lot of reports were being written and they were being held for review because we do that in batches. And so every report that we write has to be technically reviewed and administratively reviewed. And I'm actually going to go into a little more detail on that on the next slide. But on outsourced reviews, we typically do that in batches. And so analysts were completing batches and setting those aside to be reviewed. And that's why we've seen, even in this first week, that number of 511 has gone down almost 100 because those batches are now getting through that review process. And we're really encouraged to say that of what's left, the now 426, only about 90 of those have not been reviewed by the first analyst. So we really are making a lot of internal progress on those getting out the door and getting into CODIS. It just on this, and I want to explain that because on this graph, June looks like maybe that wasn't happening. But there was a lot of internal work going on that we're going to see reflected as we go through July. Okay, so I want to go through some of the challenges that we're seeing as we dedicate our resources and put our focus on getting this sexual assault kit backlog cleared. One is we've talked a lot about training and in the past months and bringing new analysts online. One piece that I haven't talked about with that is when a new analyst gets signed off, they're only signed off to write reports. They are not signed off to do technical reviews and admin reviews. So the technical review and the admin review basically function to make sure that before a report goes out the door, you have your person who wrote it, and then you have 2 other people ensuring that everything is correct on that report. Also in biology, all 3 of those people have to agree on the technical piece of those conclusions. So do they all agree that those conclusions are correct, technically correct, and that they can go out the door? So it is a critical piece of our process. It's like the gatekeeper, right? That technical and admin review is the gatekeeper of making sure that the right stuff goes out the door. And so as a new analyst is signed off and they're going from training to casework, right? We actually require that a supervisor or a manager or a technical leader are the ones that have to conduct that process on their cases. So they're the ones who have to technically review and admin review those cases. The reason for that is we do feel when we sign off an analyst that they're prepared for casework, but we don't want to just say, you're prepared, now we're going to let you loose and we're not going to review your work, to make sure that in that transition to real casework, that you got everything you needed. And so that, I think, is a really important quality measure we put in place, and something that really is non-negotiable when you think of why we put it there, but it does create bottlenecks. We have 3 people, sorry, right now, because we have the tech lead vacancy, who can conduct these technical and admin reviews for our 5 new analysts. And so you can imagine the 5 new analysts are writing, and you have not that many people reviewing their cases, and all of those people have other responsibilities, because their responsibility is also to manage the section. And so we really are running into some bottlenecks there that keep us from getting quite as many cases out the door as quickly as we would like to. One thing we're doing to try to somewhat mitigate extra time involved in that is we pair a new analyst with one of these people, so that their cases aren't just sitting on a shelf and waiting for the next person to pick it up. They have, for example, one analyst is paired with our manager. And so that way they automatically give their cases to the manager. She knows she has to get those reviewed and get that feedback back to the analyst and the case completed. But, that's more of just how we're trying to change the process to mitigate for that. The challenge itself, to be honest, that's going to be a bottleneck with new analysts for the most part, no matter what we do, because we're limiting who can review those cases. The other piece is when a new analyst is signed off, they're not signed off to conduct technical reviews either, even of other people's casework. That is a different skill set, and one that needs to be taught and reviewed before we let them be those gatekeepers of the work going out the door. And so right now we have, with all of the analysts that we trained and signed off recently, we have 10 full-time DNA analysts. Only 4 of those currently are authorized to conduct technical reviews and administrative reviews. So again, you end up having a bit of a bottleneck in that process. Right now, the main way we're working on mitigating that is making sure as we get people signed off in writing, as soon as they finish their first 50 cases, that we get them into that technical review training so that we can build our review capacity. The other piece, as I said, COVID-19 is not helping us right now. It's not the reason why we're here, but it doesn't help. For the first month or so, in-house casework we could not do remotely. So we were really just focused on outsource reviews. So that definitely did not help with our backlog of what needs to be tested. The other thing we're seeing is, when I'm talking about the bottleneck in reviews, we had one analyst end up having to quarantine for 2 weeks. That is one of our technical reviewers. And what was available to technically review was not something she could do from home. And so just that one person having to go really impacts our process in-house. And the other piece I would say is, our sections have been doing amazing through COVID, and they've implemented a ton of change and process changes to be able to keep up with it. But it's also just an additional stressor that's on everybody's mind all the time. And for our management staff, it is something that every day, it probably takes up another 20% of their already full plates to manage through how to keep the sections going. And like Peter had mentioned, I feel like in the past 2 weeks, stuff has changed every day as to how we need to respond, what we're doing when people are exposed. And so it really has had an impact in this section from that perspective as well. And I would say really in all the sections. As far as mitigating for that, right, we're doing everything we can to keep people safe. The other piece is this is where outsourcing comes into play a lot, in that it helps us have some additional help in keeping these cases being worked, regardless of what's happening in our facility and to us at the time. The last piece is, as y'all know, we don't only work sexual assault kits in biology. Sexual assault kits are so critical, and we understand 100% the importance of getting them off the shelf and into CODIS, but we also deal with a lot of other terrible crimes that people are requesting work to be done on, like homicides, aggravated assaults. And so as we've been prioritizing sexual assault kits, we've been in communication a lot with our stakeholders to let them know what's going on and ensure they know, please contact us if you have a request that needs to be put at the front of the line, since we're focusing on sexual assault kits. Well, in the month of June, 40% of our requests were those. So we worked, 40 some odd kits, and the rest of the 67 requests that were completed were non-sexual assault kit type cases that needed to get worked. And again, this is where being able to outsource some of those kits will help, because when we need to be working these other kind of cases, it means sexual assault kits are still going to be in the pipeline and being worked by the vendor laboratories. And ultimately, a lot of this goes down to, we need to train more analysts. We have to get more analysts on the floor. And it is something that has been a challenge, because that analyst training is, it's not easy. It's about a 6 to 9 month process. We've seen with StarMix, we really have some improvements to make in it. But until we get through that, again, that's where the outsourcing is a really important tool for us, because we can keep that going and keep building our number of analysts that are in-house while the kits are still being worked, with the help from the vendor lab. Are there any questions on this? Okay, so then my next, the next is to talk about the outsourcing and the contracts. So I want to give you some background on what we're doing with the outsourcing, and then some, sorry, y'all. And then some details about the contracts themselves that we're asking for y'all to approve. So a couple months ago, we had talked about outsourcing. It's kind of when we started talking about it again. And at that time, we were going to continue with the current vendor. We then decided it was going to be better to do an RFP, a request for proposals, to see with the other vendors that are available, what timelines and what prices could they offer to help us with testing these kits. So we had an RFP release last month. From that process, we did actually decide to select 2 vendors. We did this for a few reasons. One is, as we've talked about with our past vendor, we ran into capacity issues with them. And so there's the piece of having 2 vendors in play to know that if we do run into capacity issues with one of them, we can lean more on the other one, and still keep things moving. I think this even comes more into play with what we're dealing with right now. One of the labs is in Virginia, and I think, a few weeks ago, I would have said up east, or that area of the country is a little better. I don't know if that's the case anymore, but they're probably better off than Texas is right now. The other is in Austin, Texas. And so we know Texas is a hot spot for COVID right now. And so I think we also need, depending on how that ends up impacting a vendor laboratory, we also need to be able to adjust. And basically, I would say now we're adjusting between HFSC and the 2 vendors, how we adjust where these cases are to get them worked the most efficiently. What we ended up seeing in these responses is that one of our vendors, the vendor in Austin, has a much better timeline than the other vendor as far as getting kits back. However, the pricing was a little harder for us. We didn't have the budget to just pick them. And so what we do have the budget with them is for our single assailant cases. They work within our budget, and their timeline, they've given us 2 different timelines. On the kits that we're going to ship to them every month, it's a 60-day turnaround time. On what we've decided, because their timeline is more reasonable, is that we're actually going to take about 180 kits that we have on our shelf currently that are single assailant cases and send those to them as soon as these contracts are approved, if they get approved. Because on those, they told us if we send them that lump amount of cases, that they could get those done in 120 days. That seems like a long time, but when we look at our turnaround time in the house, the last 3 months, if I look from how long it's taking us once a kit is assigned to be worked till it goes out the door, it's about 124 days. And so by sending that bulk of cases, even though some of them are older, to Signature Science, we're going to be able to be knocking those older cases out in parallel with them. So we're quite happy with that situation. So what we'll do is ship that bulk amount of cases out to them right away, and then continue to ship them single assailant cases every month through October. So it'll be what comes in the door that single assailant will go to them. The multiple assailant cases, those are a little different in how we qualify them as tested. In a multiple assailant case, or one where there's a consensual sex partner, every sample that's positive for male DNA needs to be tested in order for you to say that that kit is completely tested. And that's where the other vendor, Bodie, had a price that we could actually accomplish that goal with all of those kits within our budget that we had. Their timeline, however, they are the lab that we've been talking about that basically is the timeline they've given us is we're going to start shipping to them in July. They will give us kits back, but they're not going to, they have said that the project itself will not be complete until March of 2021. So we will be getting reports back starting probably in, I would say, September for the first stuff we send them through March of 2021. And so that's, again, why we picked 2 of them, because we knew at least if we had the quicker timeline on other cases, it would kind of maybe help balance it out, but also get this done within our budget. And speaking of budget, this is all funded by our now BJA grant dollars. And so this is all, these contracts will all be federally funded as opposed to coming out of the HFSC operational budget that we get from the city. And again, speaking of that, I think that's why internally, as much as we would like to not have to outsource, it's a really important tool for us. And it's a tool that the federal government is helping us pay for so that we can get to where we need to on sexual assault kits. And while we're getting there, they're not sitting on a shelf waiting to be tested. Both labs can come to Houston and testify. They're both licensed through TFSC, so that's not a problem. We typically don't see that have to happen a lot. A lot of these cases don't end up making it all the way to trial. But when they do, both of these vendors are able to come testify, and that's part of our contracts.
Dr. Castillo?
Yes, ma'am.
Excuse me for interrupting. Director Cohen has a question.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I have 2 questions, actually. Is the contract a flat fee, or does it depend on the number of kits we send them? And if they don't turn the kits around in what we consider to be a reasonable time frame, does that have an effect on the contract?
So the contract, we don't have to send them a number of kits to get the price. So the price is fixed regardless of if we send them 100 kits or 500 kits.
Okay.
So we do have the flexibility to shift between them depending on what we're seeing. We do not have anything in the contracts about penalties on the timelines.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. So but to that point, there is the way these contracts that Aquila helped us write them. We do have flexibility within the total budget to decide who's getting which kits, depending on what works best for us in the circumstance. I feel like we're in one circumstance now, and the way that things are going, I feel like in 2 months we might be in a different one. So we need that flexibility. The other is I wanted to say we are working internally on getting more data about what the impact of implementing the probabilistic genotyping or STAR mix is to our casework in-house. We'll also be working a lot clearly in the next couple of weeks with the vendors to nail down timelines. And so our goal is to be able to present you an estimated timeline for when we're going to clear this backlog at the next board meeting. The other piece that we're working on in-house is looking at the training program. As I mentioned at the beginning, and we've talked about, that definitely has led us to where we're at right now, is the training taking longer than we anticipated, but we also know that we have got to train more analysts. It's the bottleneck of our process. And so we've already started conversations internally of who the staff are that will be in the next round of analyst training. But more importantly, how are we going to change how we manage the training program so that we can do a better job of getting it done on time and effectively. And one thing I want to mention to Director Blancett is a big part of that is what you had suggested about the percent time that people are spending and using that as an accountability measure, both for management and for staff. And also as a way to quickly identify if we're getting off track and how to adjust that. So we're working on more details with that, and I'll plan on presenting that as well next month, so y'all can see where we're going so that we don't have to outsource forever. So that outsourcing really is just a tool to get us where we need to go, which is eventually having the capacity in-house to not have to come back to you and say that we have a backlog of any kind in this section. And that's all I have. If y'all have any questions before you vote on the contracts or about the ops report, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Dr. Castillo. I scrolled down too far yet again. And so I was, you had your report ready to go and I was on contracts. So thank you for keeping me straight.
No problem.
Okay, we are down to the contracts now. Since we have 2 contracts under the same RFP and grant, as well as for the same services, I would like to have the vote on have one vote on both contracts. I will entertain a motion for both contracts if any director would like to make that motion.
Lois Moore, I so move.
All right, Director Moore made the motion. Do we have a second?
I would like to second the motion.
Thank you, Director Blancett, for the second. Do we have any discussion on the contracts? Okay, for the record, we will do a roll call vote again. So everyone, please unmute your mics at this time. And Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Before I call the roll, Dr. Castillo, could you please stop sharing your screen so I could get video set up? Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Okay. And directors, please ensure that your video is turned on at this time. And on board members, please make sure again that your video is turned off. Chairwoman Mitchell.
I vote to approve.
Vice Chair Lunchkey.
I approve.
Director Vasquez.
Approve.
Director Hilder.
Approved.
Director Medina.
Approved.
Director Blancett.
I vote to approve.
Director Cohen.
Approve.
Director Moore.
Approve.
Director Huff.
Approve.
Okay, the motion carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we are moving to agenda item 11. It's our presentation by Mr. Leach, our treasurer and CFO. Let me make sure, because last time I skipped him too. So I'm going to make sure I'm on the right. Okay. Mr. Leach, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Let me try to get my PowerPoint up here. Hopefully it will be large enough to be able to see all these wonderful numbers this time. Is that visible? Somebody give me a thumbs up.
Yes, David.
Okay, thank you. Okay, before I get started with this, I just want to make sure that I give a public huge thank you and acknowledgement to the City of Houston Finance. They were able to expedite getting us our money for the fiscal year, which we are currently in. And since our budget is so designed that we spend 100% of our money in each fiscal year, that just takes a lot of pressure off of us. And I just wanted to publicly acknowledge the work that they did and helping us out and getting our money to us so that we can keep operating and doing the good work that all the lab staff does. Okay, so what I'll be doing first here is I will be doing what you've seen the last couple months, where I'm asking for your approval of a reallocation of the budget. And again, that's important that we are moving. I'm asking for your approval to move things around between line items. I am not asking for any changes in total. What you see before you is every line item of our income statement. And I'll just show you quickly the last line item. And there at the bottom, you see that the total amount under the current approved by line item is exactly the same as what I'm asking you to approve. So there's no change in total, which is what we've done in the past, just so that each line item of the budget is approved. What you will notice, I'm going back to the beginning here and then I'll go through it. What you'll notice is that in the expense line items, and here you're looking at personnel, there are there's grant money that has been spent. So I needed to move that around to where that actual grant money was spent. And then also I needed to add some to different line items and subtract some from different line items so that in total, with this new budget reallocation, which I hope you'll approve in a couple minutes, is adequate to where the actual expenditures which come in for the year, none of them exceed any specific line item. So Director Cohen, I know that's a lot and that's new for you. Hopefully you're able to track along with that. Those of you who have been through this several times, you know what I'm talking about. But what you'll notice is that since we do spend, or we're getting very close to spending 100% of our budget, I am having to move around a lot more of the specific line items. Because conceptually, if you think about it, if we ever get to a point where we spend every penny of our budget, that would mean that I will have to, every time a new invoice comes in towards the end of the year, I'll have to, unless I guessed perfect, which I never will, by line item, I'll have to add some to one account or take some away from another account. So just as an example, in the general lab supply, you see that I added 26,000, but all these other line items, I was able to reduce them some. And I will toggle through the other line items for you to view, and you have access to this also. And then I will entertain any specific questions that, sorry, too many, any specific questions that you would have on this before asking for your approval.
Is it mainly grants that you're moving around? That's what I'm trying to look at on the screen here, Mr. Leach.
In the column that you're looking at right now, where you see the total grant expenditures of $358,899, and then the negative $358, because when we originally budget the grant, I put it all in one bucket until we decide and we actually spend the money. So there you can see some of it was spent for freight, some of it was spent for an account that we call miscellaneous other. Most of it, grant money, is spent there in the outsourcing, the 78,000, or consulting. That's where most of it is spent. But also, so it's not just grant money, I'm also moving around. If we didn't have any grant money, or we didn't spend any money on the building, and next year you won't see the building, that won't be there. It will just be other things. So at the beginning of the year, I estimate each account where we'll spend money, but the actual expenditures always come in a little bit different than what my estimate was in preparing the budget. In total, the number doesn't change, but it moves around between line items.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I think Director Blanchette has a question too.
I do. I'm looking at the page that shows line item 170980, and it's something const in progress, and it is just a big change there.
Okay, that is construction in progress. So that's where as we're spending money to, especially for the move that's going to become capital, we put it there until we actually put that asset into use, and then we move it out of the construction in progress and we capitalize it as a part of a building, or, well, it's the building. So it's all capital spending. The cash flows out the door, but just from an accounting standpoint, until you actually put the asset into use and start depreciating it, you have to park it and you put it there in construction in progress until it becomes an active asset, and then you start capitalizing it. You move it from construction in progress into capital.
Okay, so now that I know this is construction, where in the budget are you accounting for work that has to be done for the ventilation for the firearms area?
That is a part of the lease that's being done, and where we incur additional expenses that are in addition to what is being covered by the owner of the building, we would just find a place in the budget to pay for it. But most of that cost is a part of the original negotiation of them fixing the building for us to move into it. So that's just a part of our lease cost.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Were there other questions? If not, I need approval to move for this reallocation of the budget, please.
Okay, great. All right, so I would like to see, is there a motion to approve the budget reallocation as we've seen here and presented by Mr. Leach?
I'd like to make a
Also
motion to
move.
approve this budget.
Okay, Director Blanchett, I heard her make the motion for approval. A second?
Second.
Okay, Director Moore has seconded. And we have to do a roll call vote again. So, Mr. Leach, if you will stop sharing for just a moment. And our secretary, Madam Secretary, if you would prepare to call the roll vote for this.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
And Mr. Leach, your screen is still being shared.
Did I undo it?
No,
No.
sir, it's still up.
Okay.
Okay, we're back. Chairwoman Mitchell,
I vote to approve.
Vice Chair Lenschke,
I approve.
Director Vasquez,
I approve.
Director Hilder,
Approve.
Director Medina,
Approve.
Director Blanchett,
I approve.
Director Cohen,
Approve.
Director Moore,
Approve.
Director Huff.
Approve.
Okay, thank you. The motion carries unanimously. All right, there you go, Mr. Leach. All righty, I would also like to just acknowledge Mr. Darrell Davis. He's on our technical advisory group. He has joined our meeting and he does so very often, so welcome. We're going to continue on, Mr. Leach, with the treasurer's report. So
Okay.
you have the floor again.
Okay, so it being the end of the year, we don't have the final numbers for the year, but we are close. And what I want to do is I want to take this opportunity to, I can't do two things at the same time. Okay, to go over the year's numbers. And Director Cohen, hopefully this will be a good time to do this being your first meeting, to kind of see what do we do with the money that's given to us by the city. So here, I want to start off at a higher level, and you see where we spend the money that's allocated to us. A little over 70% of the money goes to people cost. And then the next biggest piece are services, and then supplies, and then non-capital and capital. And the only difference between non-capital and capital is if the amount of the asset being purchased is greater than $5,000, we capitalize it. If it's less than $5,000, we go ahead and expense it, even though it's expected to live or last more than a year. So a good example of that is computer equipment. And that number is a little bit higher this year as a percentage than it has been in past years. When COVID happened, we needed to purchase a lot of laptops, several laptops for people to have access to be able to work from their house. and each of those are non-capital items. So that's where we spend the money as a broader brush. If you look at a comparison in our business year over year, this year versus last year, what you'll notice is that everything is almost the same. The amount of revenue that we received in 20 and 19 were the same. Other revenue, which would be grants mostly and interest income, changed a little bit higher this year, but you'll notice very consistent. Our business is somewhat stabilized as far as our expenditures. What you'll notice here is a big difference in capital, and that is because last year we capitalized the building at $30 million. This year it's a normal capital expenditures, which were mostly vehicles for CSU and some other minor purchases. But that's how we look year over year. Let's look at an FTE is a full-time equivalent. So let's look at our people. So as Dr. Stout had mentioned, we're right around 200 people this year. But if you look back to 2017, you see a mix of when we first started, we had several City of Houston employees, and then we had Houston Forensic, and you'll notice it has changed. The total numbers are about the same. The difference between 2018 and 2019 was the approval that we received to help out CSU and Leighton Prince. So we had a jump there, but it's been consistent 2019 to 2020. The approved positions were the same. The only difference is just since it's full-time equivalents, it's really the vacancy rate due to people resigning. You'll notice that we have 7 employees that are City of Houston employees that we lease from the city. That number is expected to remain constant. Next year, you'll see a bump of 5 employees that we received for the budget this year to help out with toxicology. So that's the number of employees that we have. Over here, you see to the right, you see a cost per employee in thousands. So if you go back to 17, what you'll notice is that and this is an all-in cost. This isn't their salary. This is including taxes, benefits, everything, all-in cost for an employee. Back to 2017, HFSC employee was around 90, City of Houston around 98, around 121, and then a blended cost of 98. You can see the trend to 2020 to where the blended cost is 95, and it just information for you to kind of see. Since that is 71% of the cost of our business, you can, and you know that we have around 200 employees there, you can see the cost per employee. Any questions thus far? I can't see where somebody's raising a hand or not, so I'm going to have to ask somebody to tell me if there's a question.
So far, no hands are raised, Mr. Leach.
Okay. All right. So we looked at how much money was spent by category, people, service, and other things. Now you can see what percentage of that money is spent by department. Notice that the largest department as far as spending is biology, also support services. All of these are self-explanatory as far as the department, except for maybe support services. And that includes, you know, the finance function. It includes the executive function. It includes HR. It includes public services and the legal. So what in some ways you might call overhead, but those are those functions. You see the quality department, IT, Leighton Prince, and really that's going to track pretty closely to how many people they have. If 71% of our costs are people costs, then if a department has more headcount in that department, it will bear a larger cost, a burden of the total cost. So there you can see by department where we spend our money. Here, this is of the 71% of the people cost by department where that money is spent. Again, biology 18%, CSU 15%, I'm not going to read through all of this. For those of you that are already familiar with it, nothing's really changed year over year. For those of you who are new, you can spend a little bit of time digging into this if you'd like, just to understand where the money goes. Here you can see, so this is just 5% of our total cost, but almost all of the cost goes into laboratory supplies of that 5%. And that's what we were talking about earlier. I believe Dr. Director Blanchette mentioned the question about the formulas that we use in biology, and that's what makes up most of this. Those are very expensive, and that's where most of that cost goes, is into biology. So this, of the 5%, of the 84%, you can see that half of it goes into biology. So most of the money that we spend for lab supplies goes into biology for doing the testing, the DNA testing. You can see the other departments use toxicology, uses some of the supplies. I'll move on. Now, this is showing you of the 19% of the services cost. It's pretty evenly spread across all business units. This title here called Medical and Dental Laboratory Services, I use that account because that's the account that the city uses, and our financials roll up into the city, so I use their chart of accounts. But really, that is the outsourcing. So when you see medical and dental, think the outsourcing that's done by toxicology and by FBio, and know that most of the outsourcing that's done by FBio is grant spending. So that money, most of that money is refunded. You'll also see that we spend a lot of money on software. Almost everything that we do, we have a software license for it. A lot of computers and software is used, our lab systems and everything. So there you can see the rental real estate, that's just the lease for the building. And then you can see other things there on how the money is spent. And that's it for me. I'll go back to the last one, and if there's any questions that I need to try to answer. Okay, I'll take that as a no. I will stop sharing, and thank you guys for your attention and for your continued support.
All right, thank you, Mr. Leach. We appreciate your time in pulling all this information together. It was very good to kind of see this overall picture, so thank you so much. All right, if there are no other questions for Mr. Leach, then we're going to move on. We're into our section about reports and presentations by the staff, which are always really very exciting. Agenda item 13 is going to be the report from Mr. Jerry Pena. He is the director of our CSU and digital multimedia departments. He's going to talk about evidence and the impact that COVID-19 is having on operations. Mr. Pena, you are up.
Great. Can everybody see me? Good.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome aboard, Director Cohen. Happy to work with you, and if there's anything I can do, starting now to help you better understand the Multimedia and Crime Scene Division, please reach out, let me know. Be happy to walk you through our process in more detail. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and try and share my report here. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. All right, let's start off with the COVID-19 and multimedia. As Dr. Stout alluded to in his opening presentation, the multimedia was hit the hardest with staff, as it did impact our audio video call out responsibilities. It wiped out the entire audio video call out team. The 3 staff members confirmed positive, 2 were quarantined due to direct exposure. We're waiting on results from those 2. The good news is, as of yesterday, we have we have had 2 of our positive analysts back on staff, back on duty. So that really does help. So the audio video call out, which was being supplemented by the crime scene unit while they were down, are able to respond to those calls for service now. Any questions on that part of it? And again, like David stated, I'm unable to see if anybody's raising their hand, so if you could just please call out, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Okay, hearing none, I'll move on to the next slide. Moving on to the crime scene unit, we did have 2 confirmed positive COVID staff members. One of them is still recovering. The other one was just reinstated a couple of days ago and is back to full duty. And that's really helpful. But in the month of June, we had a total of 5 staff members that were either recovering from COVID positive or quarantined due to exposure to COVID or to someone with a family member or a positive COVID person. That impacted our already short-staffed unit. As you know, we are a 24/7 operation, and with the call volume going up month after month after month, we had to do something to ensure that during these times of shortages of staff that we had enough personnel to be able to answer to the calls that we're normally required to respond to. As a result, I was forced to have to implement an on-call schedule for the crime scene unit. This is the first time we've had to do this at this magnitude, but effective July 3rd, the crime scene unit did go on temporary on-call status, which puts them on call for 12 hours after they come off shift in the event that we do need to deploy additional personnel to cover some of these scenes. Again, crime scene is a 24/7 operation, and with only having 27 staff members, sometimes meeting that staff level for each shift, it becomes challenging. And with all the quarantines and exposures, that really has impacted us. I know prior to last month, at one point, we also had 2 military deployments from our crime scene staff. One of them is still out on military deployment. The other one is back. So those were 2 additional non-COVID related positions that we lost temporarily. So it does impact our operation. And like I said, the call volume continues to rise month after month. The other part of that is the other part, let me back up. So the temporary on-call schedule is it is a temporary schedule. We hope to, once we get to a point to where we can remove that schedule from the crime scene staff without having to go to our emergency schedule. Emergency schedule would force us to place existing staff on a 12 on, 12 on, 12 off shift and cover 2 shifts to cover the 24-hour period of the day. We continue to lose personnel due to COVID or anything else. That is our last resort. I'm mentioning this now just in the event that the way things have been working out, we continue to lose staff. We will have to resort to this emergency schedule, which is our last ditch effort to maintain adequate staff for answering the calls for service as they keep coming in. Do we have any questions? Okay, hearing.
Yes.
Yep, okay.
Oops, excuse me. I'm sorry. Director Blanchett has a question, and then so do I, Mr. Pena. But Janet, you go first.
Okay. Just a quick question regarding CSU staff, since it's one of the most public-facing people that we have. What kind of PPE are they having, and do they feel like it's enough for what they're doing?
Yes, PPE, I think we're adequately equipped with PPE. Like as Dr. Stout did mention, they do have the N95 mask They also have eyeglass protection. They double glove at each scene and remove gloves as they need to, and reapply gloves in between evidence handling. They do wear shoe covers to help, protect their footwear. Those are disposable as well, and they change those out as they feel they need to at the scene. And we also have the Tyvek suits. Tyvek suits are very uncomfortable. For those of you that have ever worn them in the heat of Houston, can relate to being in one of those. But they are equipped with these Tyvek suits, and if the scene does call for it, they have them available with them. They carry them with them in their vehicles, and they're able to down that level of protection if the situation warrants.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Stacey, you
Now,
had-
yes, I had a question. Are we thinking ahead just in case we have to go to the emergency schedule and then we continue to have, I guess we continue to have CSU becoming symptomatic, and what's our worst case scenario? I know we'd like to hope that the 12 hours will stop there, but what's going to happen if we have so many people down in CSU and crime scenes are going up? Are we going to how are we going to triage our scenes?
Right. And at that point, it's just going to be the priority of the scene, and we'll have to determine, which scenes are priority. Of course, officer-involved shootings are the most priority cases, and followed by murders, and then sexual assaults and aggravated assaults. We'll just have to prioritize them. The severity of the case will dictate, how many crime scene investigators we end up deploying to the scene. In the past we've implemented where we try to have at least 2 crime scene investigators at the scene to help move the scene along. There could be a moment where we can, just get 2 crime scene investigators to the scene, do a complete evaluation, maybe get to a point to where we're able to free one up and then redeploy them to another scene, and just kind of play leapfrog with crime scenes that way until we get enough personnel to be at a particular scene. Other than that, I mean, it's kind of like we're stuck in the mud. If we can't respond because we have no additional personnel to respond, there'll be calls that don't get answered, and we've had to turn down some non-serious calls that we've been taking because we just don't have the personnel.
Yeah, no, thank you. I hope we don't head that way, but I'm glad that you're thinking about this and really trying to plan ahead, because that's important instead of, being behind the 8 ball. So thank you.
Right. Yeah, and you guys may have heard also, the fire department had to shut down a ladder unit or a couple of ladder units only because they're being severely impacted as well, and they just don't have the personnel to respond to these. So, I mean, we have an obligation to be at these scenes, and we try to make every effort to ensure we have coverage and people at these scenes. But when you have nowhere to draw from, I mean, those are extreme measures, and we just have to do what we can with that in that situation. Any other questions? Okay, I'll move on to the next slide. And part of one of the responsibilities crime scenes is also responsible for is the vehicle examination building. And what happens when the Houston Police Department has a vehicle that's of interest and needs to be processed for forensic evidence, it gets towed over to the vehicle examination building. It's the responsibility of the Houston Forensic Science Center to provide that level of investigation forensically to the Houston Police Department for the vehicles that are towed over there. In January, we had a record number of vehicles that were being towed to the vehicle processing bay, or the VEB as I'll refer to it. And we thought we saw, that number go really high in January, which was record breaking. It seemed to trim down, but then last month it picked up again and we had another 58 vehicles. And these range everything from a property crime all the way up to a person crime. And these are vehicles that have to be processed forensically. Sometimes the challenge is when there is a search warrant, we have an allotted time to be able to legally be in that vehicle to do our investigation before that warrant expires. And if we let that warrant expire, then that affects our ability to go in there legally and do what we need to do as far as the forensic investigation. Many times we're able to reissue the warrant. We have to give it to the detective, work with the detective, have them go to the judge and get another warrant. We try not to let that happen because that just creates a backlog for us as well as the investigators and the court system. Because right now, as we've been talking about, the court is behind. So we try and get to that as best we can, but that's a big responsibility for the Houston Forensic Science Center, is ensuring that these vehicles do get processed in a timely manner. My next slide, I do have a graph to show you the difference between the number of vehicles that we're processing this year versus the number of vehicles we processed the same time last year. So before I move on to that slide, are there any questions on this? Okay. So as you can see, the blue line is the 2019 average, and the gold or orange or gold line is the this year's. And you can see this year's just surpassed last year, with the exception of May. In May, we're pretty much on target, but you see June. I mean, June just shot up, and we have almost 60 cases in June. I think it was 58 to be exact, versus our record number, which was 63 or 64 in January of this year. So we've seen the most vehicles for this year in both January and June. But overall, the number of vehicles coming into the VEB for processing has increased year over year. Any questions on that? Okay, well, that concludes my report, and I just want to thank you all for your time. And if there's anything I can answer off after the meeting, please reach out to me.
Thank you, Mr. Pena. Are any other questions? Does anyone have anything else they need to ask him or they would like to? Okay, we're going to continue on with our agenda. We've got agenda item number 14, which is an update from Mr. Charles Evans, who is our Director of Business Development. He's going to give us an update on the 500 Jefferson Building, renovations to the Vehicle Examination Bay, which is located at 1305 Dart Street, and the renewal of the lease for the corporation's crime scene house, which is located at 1620 Crockett Street. All right, Mr. Evans, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I'll just share my screen. Can you see my remarks there, please, on the screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
As you can probably see, I'm using David Leach's computer here because I've had some issues with my PC, but David and I keeping social distancing, I can assure you, in his office here. My name's Charles Evans. I'm the Director of Business Development. And as Stacy mentioned, I'd like to give you an update on the Vehicle Examination Building, our renovation there, talk about the 500 Jefferson firing range, and then also talk about the crime scene house lease agreement, or renewal as we could call it. Peter Stout has provided some summary comments in the last few board meetings, but I want to provide a more comprehensive update for you today. Given that we have a few recent board members, I'll also give some additional background comments as I go through my review here. And as Stacy mentioned, the Vehicle Examination Building, that's based on 1305 Dart Street. It's about 5 minutes from our 500 Jefferson main office, so it's a very convenient location for us. It's basically a steel warehouse structure, small office, 4 closed bays, 4 open bays, about 3,000 square feet. And I would dearly say that it is in need of renovation, so this is an important project for us. As part of this project, and because HFSC is not a city department, we had to get an interlocal agreement, an ILA, between the city and ourselves to allow us to avail of the expertise and processes that the City Design and Construction Organization has. That City Council approval was received middle of June. And what that does allows us to use their expertise and, equally as importantly, their job order contracting process and network. And what that means to all of us is we're able to leverage their competitive bidding that's already been done, the use of proven contractors who are familiar with the city process, and equally we are familiar with them, thereby leveraging their pricing and their scale. Some updates, so that's done. We've got the ILA, and that's a good piece of work finished. If we talk about the VEB location, and obviously, you know, Jerry mentioned his comments about the VEB a few minutes ago. Just to put in perspective, he processed 58 vehicles there last month. When we had our initial conversation at the beginning of this year, we were talking 42 vehicles as an average. So as you can see, the use of that facility is rising. And what Jerry's CSU team does there is vehicle examination, photography, trace collection, bullet path and trajectory, fingerprints, and DNA collection. The VEB renovation project has a list of items, and because we have a finite number of dollars, we will do as much as we can here this year. There will be a tail of this project, and we may do it based on priority over the years. But in list of priority is we have 4 open bays today. We want to enclose those to double the capacity for Jerry's people to 8. That will require us to add garage doors and structural, will require us to replace HVAC and associated electrical. All of that HVAC is at end of life. Install and improve insulation, enhance security, card reader system and cameras. And we are looking there to leverage what we did at 500 Jefferson. Replace the bathroom. And to be honest, that's kind of our scope with maybe some additional electric. We will likely have to delay the flooring, IT, photography, front door canopy until later. From a funding standpoint, we have been successful in getting a federal grant for 75%, $114 of the $152,000. That grant requires us to have a 25% match, or $38,000. That's why our budget is $152,000. We have discussed earlier about City Design and Construction determining if alternative funds would be available for HVAC and associated electric. And we heard middle of this week that they have been successful in getting those funds through a city code compliance fund. That is a big plus for us because we will be able to fund that scope through this city dollars. And this particular piece of scope may have taken 2/3 of our budget. So this is a significant plus for us. We are looking to finalize the scope. Unfortunately, our lead resource is out on medical leave. I hope he gets better soon. And we are working now with interim project resources, which are coming up to speed. Critical path is clearly the HVAC and Associated Electric. The design on that is complete. We've received a contractor bid. Long lead time items have been identified, and the permit should be submitted to the city today. This is the only material permit item that needs to be submitted. Our current actions are obviously alternative funding done. We have scheduled a prioritization discussion between the city and our team for next Thursday, July the 16th. And it is our intent there to basically finalize the scope that we require. And then through our contracts person we work with, we will have an update with her next week. She's on our team, and she will determine if there's any additional conversations that need to happen with the federal grants in relation to that. And similar to what Amy discussed earlier about the funding of the grants on the DNA side, BJA, Bureau of Justice Assistance, is providing the funding here. The project we estimate is 3 months. I should add a complexity. This is a small project, but because we need to keep the VEB running, we will have to do this project in 2 phases. We will complete the work, in other words, enclosing the 4 open bays into 4 closed bays first. Jerry will then move his CSU operations to those bays while we work on the existing bays after that. So that adds a complexity. We estimate about 3 months. The permit, we will see how long that takes. I will tell you the project's doable, but it's tight. But we need to progress it here. But we've made some good progress over the last couple of weeks. So I'll stop there if there's any other questions on the VEB at this moment. Okay, I'll go to my next slide. And just a little bit of background on 500 Jefferson. We moved into 500 Jefferson from multiple floors in a couple of buildings during 2019. We occupy 4 floors in this facility and part of the basement. We moved into as-is office floors just to, the furniture was donated to us just to limit our expenditures there, and then to a purpose-built lab. The move-in was conducted over the March to November of 2019 period. And I would say the move was handled ahead of schedule, under budget, required functionality. And in fact, in a good team effort among everybody, we were able to get this job done from seeing the space first time through negotiation to move in 17 months. So it was a good team effort on this particular project. One item that was a tail on this project, and we've discussed this with you a few times, was the firearms basement firing range. And Janet, I can confirm that what David said is true. We ended up putting in here a much larger motor that was originally intended for the venting. That incurred the landlord with additional funds, which he totally funded himself. This actual piece of work here did not incur any additional cost by HVAC other than what is in the lease cost that we're spending here. We've made a lot of progress in June. We completed the exhaust fan solution. We obtained the more powerful motor. We ran a test on this motor on June the 8th and identified that we need to strengthen the ductwork because the power of this motor. That ductwork strengthening was completed on June 26th, and we ran the test on the on this venting facility with our testing consultant this Monday, this Tuesday, excuse me, July the 7th. I can thankfully confirm that the motor met all requirements. The venting is delivering the required airflow, and so we are complete with this particular scope of work. The consultant is sending his final test documentation, but did confirm to me that we have met all requirements. We are proposing to do a 6-monthly, in other words, twice a year smoke test on this to make sure that the firearms is dissipating. And in fact, we are going through the process now of documenting what is required to do to meet that particular requirement. I should point out that this is new functionality for HFSC. We use this firing range, it's 25 feet, to test our firing rifles and long guns. We did not have this functionality in our previous locations. We have up until to date been able to test fire sporadically, but now we can use this facility to its full capability. So I am relieved to have this one done on our list. Okay, any questions on the firing range, please? I think what we found in living with 500 Jefferson, that this facility is performing well. We made some tweaks to the facility. We get good advice from our people, but we're finding that the facility is dearly meeting what we required. Okay, if there are no questions, I'll go to my last item, Crime Scene House 10-year lease agreement. And I could call this, in quotes, renewal. Now, this is again a city-owned building. It was a former small fire station, but excellently meets our need to do CSU training exercises and also pre and post-COVID outreach events. So it's a very useful facility to meet our requirements. When this facility came over to us, the city and ourselves signed a 5-year lease agreement, which was due to expire at the end of August, in other words, at the end of next month. In working with the city and with their legal, we prepared collectively a new 10-year lease agreement, basically renewal under the same lease terms. And this renewal is within Peter Stout's authority here. Basically, there's no lease cost on this facility. We pay building maintenance, operating expenses, and utilities. This particular lease agreement was submitted to the City Council on July the 1st and was approved, and we have received now the signed agreement. So again, another item where we've long-term positioned ourselves for a very useful facility. So that completes my prepared remarks. I'd be pleased to answer any further questions as required. And other than that, I'll log out.
All right, thank you so much. All right, I am sure having the firearms stuff taken care of is a huge relief for you and everyone. So congratulations on completing that part of the project, Okay, next item on the agenda is our report from Ms. Erica Zemak, who is our quality director. And she will provide some information regarding quality assurance, a review of the blind quality control program, and testimony monitoring and proficiency testing.
Hi, good morning. I'm Erica Zemak. I'm the quality director here at HFSC. My first slide is a slide that has to do with our blind quality control program. So just as a quick background, accreditation requirements have in place here at HFSC. They require us to participate in proficiency testing. All sections and all forensic practitioners have to participate in proficiency testing in order for us to maintain our accreditation. In addition to open proficiency testing, where an analyst is well aware that they are taking a proficiency test, HFSC also has a blind quality control program. And the intent of the blind quality control program is for analysts to perform analysis on cases that are prepared by the quality division, but without the analyst's knowledge. And so they treat these cases just like their routine casework. And we ultimately rate the findings from the analysts and determine them to be satisfactory or unsatisfactory, just like a normal proficiency program. And so the blind quality program is very robust here at HFSC. We submit over 40 samples a month as part of this program. And so the graph that I'm showing here today is just a breakdown of what those submissions are, how many there are, and what sections they are in on a monthly basis. And as you can see from this graph, the quality division was successful in meeting our monthly goals for the month of June and submitted all of the expected quality controls last month. And so even with the complications of COVID-19, the quality division has been able to not only submit the monthly goals or meet the monthly goals, I should say, for blind quality controls in the month of June, but consistently since COVID-19 has occurred, we have met our monthly goals every month, month after month, which is a tremendous amount of work. But it leads me into my next slide, which is some of the challenges that we're facing. So even though the quality division is able to submit these blind quality controls on a monthly basis, we've seen, and Dr. Castillo spoke about today already, that sections are having capacity issues trying to revamp, if you will, their workflows as a result of COVID-19. And so we'd like to, or I'm going to talk specifically about the latent print section for my example here today. So just a little background about the latent print section. There are two types of requests for the latent print section. One is the submission for processing, meaning you have a physical item of evidence and you would like it to be processed to determine whether or not you're able to develop any latent prints on that item. That is submitted to the processing laboratory, and it is essentially processed. Latent prints, if developed, are then imaged, and those images are forwarded on to the comparison section. That leads me into the next type of submission. We have comparison submissions. If in fact an item has already been processed and it's determined that it has possible suitable latent prints, it's submitted on to the comparison section. Those are in the form of latent lift cards. Those are cards where a developed latent print has essentially been captured, if you will, on a latent print card, and those cards are brought to the HPD property room. So for the purposes of today, I'm going to talk specifically about the comparison section and the comparison requests. In the comparison section, there are two types of requests that come through. The first is an automatic request, or the auto request, that comes in whenever latent print cards are submitted to the property room. The officers have nothing further that they need to do. Those latent print requests for analysis are already made and automatically entered into the system for the latent print comparison section. The other type of request is an officer request, meaning an officer contacts the laboratory in some form and requests for a specific case to be prioritized. And as you heard Amy say recently, or rather just previous to this, right now the latent print section is prioritizing older cases and also rush cases. And so while that decision was made and clearly benefits the stakeholders of our community, it has repercussions for the blind program. The blind program doesn't typically submit cases by either of those means. And so what we're seeing is that the latent print blind quality control samples are not being analyzed routinely by the section. And so it's not just the latent print section, in all fairness. Amy had also mentioned, if you recall, that sexual assault kits are being prioritized in the forensic biology section, and that they are letting stakeholders know that if there are rush requests to let them know. But again, the blind quality program doesn't typically submit samples within either one of those avenues. And so I mention it to the board just in the sense of, this is a challenge that we're facing here in the quality division. and we're actively working with section management and trying to figure out ways around what we've been doing historically and try and revamp our processes, because having having blind quality controls submitted is certainly one half of the puzzle, if you will, but until those tests actually get analyzed, they're not really generating as much value as they could potentially. And so I will keep the board updated as to what steps we take to try and mitigate that challenge. Secondly, I wanted to talk about the blind quality control DNA mixtures. If you recall, I spoke a little bit about it last month, and Director Cohen, I'll give you a small recap. The Quality Division submitted a blind quality control to the forensic biology section with the anticipation that it would yield a single source DNA profile, meaning a staff member created this sample and we anticipated that we would generate this staff member's DNA profile once the analysis was done. However, instead of yielding a single source DNA profile, we yielded a mixture of DNA. So long story short, we were able to get a reference sample from the staff member's significant other. And once we were able to see that DNA profile, it was consistent with that other contributor or the second contributor to that sample. And so we were able to essentially source both DNA components in that mixture. If the board recalls, last month I said that there were two DNA mixtures, one that I spoke about, the one I just gave a brief recap on, and the other was still being investigated. And it's that one that I'd like to get into a little bit more detail about today. And so in a lot of ways, these two cases were very similar. They were both created by having a staff member swab, again, the back of their neck. They were both submitted to the forensic biology section as a contact sample, and they were both expected to yield a single source DNA profile from the staff member who created that sample. However, they both instead yielded mixtures. But they are also a little bit different in that last month's mixture that we talked about, that staff member resides with one other individual, her significant other, and this month's mixture is a bit different. This staff member actually resides with multiple family members, which may or may not be contributing to the mixture that we're seeing. So when essentially we got this mixture, I am a former DNA analyst. Prior to coming to Houston, I worked in a forensic biology laboratory for 17 years before coming out here. So when I saw this mixture, admittedly, I'm a bit rusty, but I sat down to try and interpret what I was seeing. The difficulty of this mixture, unlike last month's mixture, is that it wasn't straightforward. It had a very low quality as compared to last month's mixture, and also in general, it was difficult to determine whether or not the mixture consisted of 2 contributors or 3 contributors. And so again, admittedly, because I am a little bit rusty, I actually approached the biology section, 2 independent analysts, and asked them if they could also take a look at this mixture and give me their independent interpretation of the mixture. And while both analysts stated that they also thought that it was a 3-person mixture, both indicated that they thought it would be a good mixture or an eligible mixture for the StarMix software that we've recently brought online. And so that's exactly what we did. I requested that the forensic biology section run this mixture through the StarMix software. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that software was able to do. But quickly, I would just like to pause for 1 second and speak about the StarMix software. Now, I've had no formal training on the StarMix software. I'm not a part of the forensic biology laboratory. But again, being a former analyst, I can say this software is amazing. I mean, it's awesome. It is able to take into consideration a multitude of potential scenarios far beyond anything that any one human can do, right? It's able to do calculations far beyond that of which I am capable of or any human is capable of. And so I just want to impress upon you that having this software online at our laboratory is just an amazing tool to have in our toolbox. So when we ran this mixture in the StarMix software, it also favored this mixture as being a 3-person mixture. However, it was not able to determine conclusively what the DNA profiles were for the second or third contributors. So take that in mind. Even with as an amazing of a software that this is, it still has limitations. And a lot of those limitations center around the limitation of the data. When the data is of poor quality, or you are admittedly, you believe, I should say, that you are missing data when you're looking at this mixture, those limitations essentially cap, if you will, what that software can do. We were, however, able to use the software to compare the mixture to the elimination database. The elimination database is a database of DNA profiles from every staff member here at HFSC, not just those in the forensic biology section, as well as any visitors that we've had over the years that have come into the forensic biology section. And so in that comparison, other than the association to the staff member who created the sample, there were no other hits affiliated. And so again, while I did my own check, manual check, if you will, against the elimination database, the fact that the software can do it, and again, look at combinations far beyond that, which I, as just a human, can do, is again a humongous tool that we have in our toolbox. So all told, I think the lessons learned from this particular DNA mixture is, again, number one, the quality division will look into additional steps to take to ensure that intended single source samples actually yield single source samples. That way, by adding those additional steps, we can help to minimize the likelihood of something like this happening again when we create future samples. I think number two, it just speaks about the level of sensitivity of DNA testing that's being done in this day and age, and certainly here at HFSC. This testing is extremely sensitive, that we're generating DNA that we didn't know was there or hadn't even anticipated would be there. And then three, I think it speaks to the complexity of the cases that are coming through the door for the DNA laboratory. I mean, this mixture is something akin to what you would come across in everyday casework. And again, even with the StarMix software, there are just limitations because this work is really difficult. It's time consuming and it's very difficult. And that's just the reality of the work that we do. Before I go on to my next slide, are there any questions that I can answer about the blind quality challenges that we saw this month? Okay. Oh, yes.
I just have a simple, how do these mixtures occur? Do you know? So basically then in the future, it can teach people on how to obtain samples better?
Well, the short answer is, do I know? No, I don't, right? Because we weren't able to determine the DNA profiles of the second or third contributor, I'm at a loss as to what the source of that DNA could be. But I will throw this in. Another complicating factor was that there was a delay between when this sample was created and when this sample was ultimately interpreted by the section. And so the staff member who created this sample doesn't have a direct recall of that specific day, meaning, was her hair up? Was the back of her neck exposed? Meaning, is it likely that she could have, had DNA deposited on her just throughout the normal course of her day? Was she wearing a scarf? Was she wearing a jacket, a blazer? There was about a year plus gap between when the sample was actually created. So that's information that we didn't collect at the time, right? Because we didn't know that that would be significant or potentially significant. So again, lessons learned about our creation process.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Are there any other questions? Okay. For internal audits and assessments, we are currently undergoing a remote virtual assessment that's taking place throughout the month of July. Our opening meeting was held on July 1st, and our assessment team is a team of one. That one assessor has a forensic biology background, and so the primary focus of our assessment will be forensic biology. However, that's not to say that other sections won't also have to, what's the word I'm looking for? Brandish, if you will, documents if requested in order to show that we are meeting all of our accreditation requirements. So the assessor is reviewing documents remotely, and she has been observing staff virtually. So just last week, okay, I apologize. My days are running together. It was actually earlier this week. She was able to observe staff via FaceTime. And so one staff member was able to, of course, in the appropriate PPE, FaceTime with the assessor so that she was able to observe a process happening in the laboratory. And so the closing meeting at this point is scheduled for July 22nd. But of course, being that this is a brand new process and virtual remote assessment, we've certainly never been through. The assessor has indicated this is, a new experience for her. We will remain flexible as to when the closing meeting will be scheduled, but I will let the board know once those decisions are finalized. And by next month, I should be able to update the board as to the outcome of the assessment. And so the board is aware, our FBI quality assurance standards, or our QAS assessment, specifically for the forensic biology laboratory. Now, this is the FBI's assessment in order for the forensic biology laboratory to maintain their access to the CODIS software. This has been scheduled for October. The hope is that this will be an on-site assessment, meaning this assessor will be able to come to our laboratory to perform this assessment. But again, because of COVID-19, we have no choice but to remain flexible, and we will accommodate schedules as time comes closer. Are there any questions on assessments that I can answer? Okay. This is a new slide that I've thrown into my presentation this month, and it has to do with the Organization of Scientific Area Committees, or OSAC. And so just to preface why I would be including a slide like this, in addition to our accreditation requirements, HFSC has voluntarily opted to adopt any OSAC registry standards that are published. So what does that mean? OSAC is an organization that has been tasked with creating and vetting discipline-specific standards that are going to be published on what's known as the OSAC registry. HFSC has opted to comply with any of the applicable standards that are placed on that registry. And I'm using the word applicable because there are disciplines that are part of OSAC and are going to be listed on that registry that HFSC does not have. And so those would be deemed non-applicable. But in December of 2018, the board passed a resolution that allows 1 year for HFSC to comply with any standards that are published on the OSAC registry. And so currently there are 9 applicable standards that have been published. And actually in the last day or two, another 4 were added to the registry. But for the purposes of today, we can just focus on the 9 that were already on there. Of those 9, we have obtained compliance with 5. 2 of those are for the seized drugs section, 2 of those are for the toxicology section, and 1 of those is considered a multidisciplinary standard, meaning it affects every discipline that we have at HFSC. It speaks to the quality management system, which is the overarching quality system at HFSC. For the other 4, One of them is for the crime scene unit, 2 are for the forensic biology section, and there is another 1 that is multidisciplinary. So I would like to just choose one of these standards to highlight for the board, just so that you have a firm understanding of what goes into being able to declare compliance with one of these standards. So for example, the one multidisciplinary standard that we are actively working towards implementation on, that standard has to do with training and continuing education or professional development. And it applies to all forensic practitioners, regardless of what discipline you are in. This training standard introduces a requirement now to have certain elements in our training programs. So for example, one of those elements is human factors issues. So for any of the sections that are licensed by the Texas Forensic Science Commission, that's the forensic biology, seized drugs, toxicology, and firearms sections. In order to achieve licensure, human factors issues are part of the coursework that's required for that license. This new OSAC standard will take human factors issues and now require it for all disciplines, regardless of licensure. Similarly, the other component to this standard is the continuing education or professional development side of it. This standard requires 16 hours minimally for all forensic science practitioners. So again, if I could just mention licensure, the Texas Forensic Science Commission licensure requires 12 hours of professional development per licensee, if you will. This standard takes those 12 hours for those 4 sections, it increases it to 16, and it broadens it to all sections, not just those 4. So if you take all of that information into account, this one standard is a humongous effort. And there are 9, and in reality now 13 standards that are already on the registry. So while we acknowledge that it is a tremendous effort, at the end of the day, it is a worthwhile investment. These standards are consensus-based standards. They have been vetted by forensic science practitioners, academic researchers, and statisticians. And previous to these standards existing, disciplines had best practice guidelines that were sort of similar in the sense that they were created by people with knowledge in those disciplines, but they were just that. They were guidelines, they were best practices. OSAC has taken guidelines and best practices and turned them into standards that if you are following, if you're complying with, you are required to meet all of the clauses inside of that. And so it has taken our accreditation requirement, which is the minimum standards by which you have to abide by in order to be a forensic laboratory in the state of Texas, and it has now increased the standard, right? It's upped the ante. It's higher the threshold for what is acceptable. And we at HFSC have already declared that we will be compliant to any applicable standard placed on that registry. We've allowed 1 year in order to obtain that compliance. And so my hope is to, as more standards get added to the registry, update the board and just keep you informed as to where we stand with our compliance to these standards. Are there any questions that I can answer about OSAC and the registry standards? Okay. And we have testimony data. We made our second round of transcript requests in the month of June. We are hoping to get transcripts back so we can start our next cycle for the transcript review project. I will let the board know how many we receive once we have. And then an update just about testimony data. Harris County has officially suspended jury trials through September 1st. Grand jury selection resumed on July 6th. It resumed at the NRG Stadium in the hopes that they were able to continue with grand jury selection, yet have a venue that's big enough to allow for the necessary social distancing that is required now because of COVID-19. But in short, what this means for the quality division is that analysts have not testified since March due to the restrictions and due to the fact that the court system has also been affected by COVID-19. So we will continue to monitor what is happening with the court system and then be sure that when testimony does resume, that we are able to meet our accreditation requirement of having those testimonies evaluated by an expert in that particular discipline when those testimonies do resume. Are there any questions I can answer on testimony? Okay, and lastly, we have the detailed data. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Okay, are there any other questions for Ms. Zemak? Okay, great. All righty. We are at the end of our agenda. I want to thank everybody for hanging in there. It's been a long meeting, but it's been a ton of information, lots of accomplishments. And I want to thank everyone at HFSC for just rising to the challenge and, and addressing our COVID-19 issues and keeping everyone safe. At this time, I would like to call for a motion to adjourn the meeting. And this will be also a voice vote, so we do not need the roll call this time. So
move.
Okay, Director Moore made a motion to adjourn the meeting. Someone will second?
Second.
I got 42 people. All right, we'll pick one.
I don't know.
Director Cohen, you seconded. I'll put you on there. All righty. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed and want to keep going? Okay, hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing everyone at our meeting in August. Take care, stay safe.
Bye.
Okay, bye everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.